News, the market's slightly higher on a pretty solid first-time jobless claims report, but temperatures across much of the nation are hitting sky-high records, and that is putting a massive strain at this hour on our aging electrical grid. A July heat wave driving up temperatures out west, and the East Coast is wilting in sweltering heat, this forcing America's utilities to issue warnings to customers to conserve energy. Energy which, if overused, could strain systems and cause blackouts. We know that. It's summer. But there is news breaking today that there's something way more sinister lurking behind electrical grids. A new report out of the United Kingdom's Space Weather Preparedness Office is warning that the very source of our globe's power could create a national disaster on a massive scale. The report says our entire air, rail system, it could all go down. Satellite communications, maybe even death and destruction could follow, all from a massive solar flare on the sun. A UK cabinet agency says in its space weather preparedness strategy report that humanity would have just 12 hours warning before a so-called coronal mass ejection sets off mass chaos, disrupting electrical power generation, telecommunications, avionics, and, as we said, satellite systems. The natural disaster would not mirror those of hurricanes or tornadoes in terms of destruction, but an extreme solar storm could leave 130 million people without power, not for months, but for years, and could also produce a catastrophic loss of life, depending on how long the nation's electrical system is down. So what do we do when we've got big utilities here in the United States? Are they ready? Are they prepared? We're less than an hour to the closing bell. Let's start the countdown. I know it sounds like we're overstating this, but there is a very legitimate report out that involves the potential for Earth to be, for the first time in a long time, in a very unique position to get smacked by a solar flare. If you don't know, a solar flare is when the sun shoots out blasts of radiation X-rays across the solar system. The report says these explosions could cause power loss, aviation disruption, communication loss, and disturbance to or loss of satellite systems. Our reasonable worst-case scenario, this is a quote, would only allow us 12 hours from observation of this flare to impact. Are we ready for this, folks? How are utility companies on a very hot day in America right now reacting to the warning? American Electric Power, AEP, has the biggest electricity network in the nation with more than 40,000 miles of transmission lines. We've got the chairman and CEO, Nick Akins, who's joining me now in a Fox Business exclusive interview. Nick, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We were going to have you anyway because, of course, the electrical grid is a big story, especially during overtaxed summers like we're having right now. But then this report came out today. How familiar are your people with the potential for what solar flares could do, and are you guys ready?
Liz, we're very familiar with that. We've been working on that for years. Certainly the resiliency of the grid, when you think about prevention, detection, and resiliency, we've obviously made changes to our grid as a result. We have additional monitoring equipment. We also have our equipment, when it's spec'd out to be placed into service, it's enhanced from various operating practices so it can withstand those kinds of solar flare activities. Any kind of geomagnetic disturbance, we're able to resolve that. Also, when you think about the resiliency of the grid, there's a lot of activities associated with what happens afterwards as well, and that's a function of partnerships with the government as well.
You think the government should be way more on top of this than it is? I mean, this report came out from the UK government. We have very smart people at NOAA and NASA who have been watching this too. But this particular report out today really caught our eye, Nick, because I looked at it and I thought, well, what's different? It appears that the way the sun and the earth are positioned and the 11 to 12-year cycle of these solar flares puts us in a perfect X-ray storm, so to speak, that would really cause a potential havoc here.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, if you have a cataclysmic event, we have to be able to look at the resiliency activities associated with that and responsiveness associated with it. The U.S. government and the electric utility industry has been working together for a couple of years now on massive types of activities with our Grid X2, Grid X3. There'd be drills associated with that to really focus on the overall effort of the government and the utility industry in response to those types of events. But I can tell you that a lot's being done already in terms of resiliency and prevention of that kind of activity, because we understand how important the electric grid is to everything we do in our daily lives.
Would it be the kind of thing, Nick, if this happened in the U.S. and a lot of the grid were knocked down, that you would turn to your competitors? I mean, you guys are the biggest. And you would say, let's all band together and fix this situation, because you get a billion-ton plasma cloud in what is known as this coronal mass ejection. And suddenly we're all in this together. It's almost like Armageddon, the movie. You know, we all had to work on it together.
Oh, you're right, Liz. I mean, we would reach out. Obviously, there's already a process in place. The utilities have been working together for decades in terms of mutual response to any kind of catastrophic event. So that process is already in place, and it's been enhanced with the government in terms of the activities that they can do in support of rehabilitation of the grid. So those are extremely important areas, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's geomagnetic disturbance, whether it's physical security. Those are the kinds of things that we work together all the time on.
Nick, I want you to stay with me right now, because I have somebody I think you'd be very interested in hearing from. We just landed Tom Berger. He's director of NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center in a Fox Business exclusive. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Berger. You see this report. Is it an overstatement? Is it over-dramatizing?
Thank you for having me, Liz. First of all, I haven't seen the report in detail. This was just released yesterday. We do have it. I am reviewing it. I don't believe it's over-dramatizing the potential effect of a large event. However, we should emphasize that we are aware of this. Our government is also studying this problem in detail, and we do think we're prepared to both forecast and alert any such event should it occur.
Okay, but right off the bat, I need to ask, because as we're looking at all of this, what should companies, the government, and individuals do to prepare? That thing on your screen looks scary, but again, it's the unique positioning of the Earth this time around that could make things worse.
Well, it's really, the sun goes through these 11-year cycles, and it's near the peak of one of its 11-year cycles right now. So what you're seeing behind me is a view of the X-ray sun, if you will. And it's active, but it's not much more active in this cycle than any other past cycle we've seen. In fact, it's a little less active on this one than in past cycles. So we're really not too concerned about being surprised by any event like this in the current solar cycle. Again, we are vigilant. NOAA and NASA both keep 24/7 vigilance on the sun.
Of course.
And here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, it's our job to really make sure that we're not taken by surprise should the sun create one of these large events.
Nick, as you look at all of the things you worry about as the head of AEP, which is a bigger threat, the Environmental Protection Agency's regulations or a solar flare? I mean, because more regulations are supposed to come down in a week or two. I don't mean to joke, but you know, we're wondering and figuring out what happens with the CO2 emissions and how much longer you guys will be given to fix that situation. Of course, Supreme Court had weighed in on this very, very dramatically.
Yeah, Liz, in some ways you're asking a great question, because everything that we do, whether it's EPA related, whether it's market related, or any of the other issues, we've retired 25% of the coal fleet in this country. And when you do things like that, you really have to think about the resiliency of the grid in response. So, and you have to take your time doing it, because margin is being taken out of the system whenever you're taking out components or changing out components. And so we want to be very careful. And I think that's what we're looking at the Clean Power Plan when the president comes out with that, is can we really deal with the timing, the timetables, the effectiveness of all the reductions that would occur in terms of retirements, and make sure that's manageable so that we can maintain that margin to answer any kinds of these types of events, whether cyber, physical, or geomagnetic.
You have a lot to think about. We appreciate you taking time out in your day. Nick Akins is American Electric Power Chairman and CEO. And by the way, AEP has a near 4% dividend payout. So if you're looking at a 10-year or AEP, you got a lot more from AEP. Thanks and good to see you. And Tom Berger, director of NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being with us. We need to tell you that we're at session highs right now. That's interesting. Just off session highs for the Dow Jones Industrials, but we're seeing a little bit more green on the screen. Again, we got some pretty decent data, except that the GDP number, while missing, looked a lot better when we saw the revised picture for first quarter. All that and much more. The closing bell, we're just about 50 minutes away. Donald Trump takes an even more commanding lead in the latest GOP polls, leaving all the other Republican candidates behind. But he does not fare the same against Democrats. What's going on? Who's beating him? Who's he beating? We're going to game this out in just moments.